Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today at this webinar, Let's Talk About It, Pewaukee's Journey to Improve System-Wide Collaboration. I'm Heidi Erstad, a Regional Technical Assistance Coordinator for the Wisconsin RTI Center, and I will be facilitating this webinar today. Just a couple of things. This is a listen-in session, so your microphones have been muted. If you have questions throughout the webinar, whether those are technical questions or content questions, please just use the question box to enter those and we'll be able to respond to you that way. We also ask that if you're attending with more than one person, we keep roster data for grant purposes. So if you could please enter the district and the name and title of those in attendance in the question box, that would be really helpful for us. You don't need to do that if it's just you listening in today. So to get us started, we just want to do just a quick introduction to ourselves as the RTI Center and do a little bit of background on this topic for today before we hand it over to Pewaukee. At the Wisconsin RTI Center, our vision, just like yours, is for each and all of our students to be successful. And our mission at the RTI Center is to really assist schools to build their capacity to develop and sustain a culturally responsive multi-level system of support that helps ensure that success for all students. Today, we're really focused on the topic of an area of collaboration. As you know, collaboration is an essential element for developing and sustaining an effective multi-level system of support. But the structure, like schedules, and the culture, like the perceptions of roles and use of data of many schools, are still better suited for isolated adult practices. In this webinar, I'm going to first share some guiding principles and ideas around collaboration, and then we're going to hear from Pewaukee School District. We'll hear from school psychologists Kelly Berlin and Dan Deuce, as well as Danielle Basanik, who's an assistant C&I director and associate principal at the high school. They're going to share Pewaukee's long-range efforts to increase the effectiveness of their K-12 collaboration in order to achieve positive student outcomes. Specifically, they're going to talk about the work they've done around elementary grade level PLC meetings, classroom teacher and interventionist collaboration, and K-12 Tier 1 screening and Tier 2-3 data review meetings. They're also going to share with us some strategies that they've used to navigate some of those obstacles and challenges and resistance along the way that have threatened the success of making collaboration work. So when we refer to the graphic that represents Wisconsin's vision of an RTI framework, we see that collaboration is one of those essential elements, not a luxury as we see in this quote here from an instructional quote, but a necessity for accomplishing change in our school. To clarify, in Wisconsin's framework, collaboration is a systematic process of collective problem solving about and planning for teaching and learning. It requires both systems thinking beyond the individual teacher or beyond the individual grade level or course, to thinking about the whole school. And also a set of systematic actions or the consistency in the way that we make decisions across the school so that we're being equitable. We also want to think about where we need to develop those collaborative structures so that we have those at all levels of support. So in addition to teams that look at data and instructional practices at the universal level, you'll also want to make sure that you have teams that take on the unique functions of multiple levels of support. And also to think about how you have structures to ensure that there's collaboration among those teams. And that's something that we're going to hear about today from Pewaukee. Our experience in research support has shown that schools with strong collaborative structures at all levels of support have focused attention to the following: making sure that regular collaboration around student data and instruction is really built into the staff expectations, schedules, and the calendar, and that this time is considered sacred. They have an increased frequency and intensity of collaborative teaming with increased as the student need increases, and that includes the degree of expertise at the table. And team norms, agendas, and protocols are used as critical tools to systematize and focus collaborative discussions. User-friendly data reports are equally as critical to that process. In addition, successful schools attend to engaging a range of perspectives and meaningful involvement and collaboration to engage those involved in and impacted by decisions. And schools make an intentional effort to include voices that are less heard. And that brings us to our last point about collaborative teams demonstrating cultural competence by recognizing the critical role of culture in our learning and teaching, including understand our own culture first. So collaborative teams maintain high beliefs for all learners from all backgrounds. Teams actively consider whether cultural mismatches in our systems, structures, policies, and practices are inhibiting or leading to a lack of student success, no matter how well intended those are. They willingly place the locus of responsibility for change on the professionals in the school. So at this time, I'm going to hand the microphone off to Pewaukee. They're going to share again with us some of the work that they've done around establishing collaborative systems and refining that work over the course of several years. So Dan and Kelly and Danielle, the floor is all yours. I'm going to hand the microphone and the presentation off to you.
Great, thank you, Heidi. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are very excited to share our journey here in Pewaukee. We decided to go back only about 5 years, and we're going to start talking about where we were, then go into where we are, and then where we want to be. And this presentation is only focused primarily on collaborative practices. And as far as our talking points, notice these are not learning targets, but just talking points, because this is our journey, and we understand that your journey might be, and probably is, very different than our journey as a district. But hopefully you can gain something throughout our presentation. And then just so you know too, Danielle is logged in as a participant, and so she'll be able to field questions as we go. So thank you. So where we were, about 5 years ago, we had several PLC, professional learning community structures, in place. It's just that not all of them were systematic. We had great emphasis on grade level PLC meetings, kindergarten through 6th grade, and then per subject, 7th through 12th grade as well. Our administrative team obviously has always been meeting, collaborating, and then we did have problem-solving teams, or RTI teams, I guess you could say, at the kindergarten through 6th grade level, but primarily focused just on Tier 3. We did not have problem-solving teams 7-12 at that point, about 5 years ago. We were also continuously trying to revamp schedules. We looked at adding in an intervention block, K6. We tried to systematically connect K6 between all of our buildings. We were really trying to look at schedules, and knowing that based on the schedule you can increase or decrease the collaborative practices between all educators. We also had coaching for Tier 1 that was in place, but again, not systematic, and it was primarily at the high school level. Danielle, do you want to talk a little bit about what that looked like?
Yeah, so initially we began our coaching model with our literacy coach. That was a part-time position, and it was really about trying to bring some literacy practices to the secondary level that were more common at the elementary level. As we know, some of our most struggling readers are often reading at levels well below the high school reading spots, and so we started with really building the capacity of our staff around a few literacy ideas. We saw some pretty quick success with our data. and saw some significant score increases and closing of our achievement gap by bringing in some of these practices at the secondary level, which started to prompt us to look at how we could use a coaching model more pervasive throughout our system. And now we have a much more comprehensive learning coach model, which I'll talk about in a little while.
Thank you. Also, about 5 years ago, we did have a district-wide screener, so we were up on that point. But again, it just wasn't as systematic as what we have it now. We didn't always have the key stakeholders reviewing the data, even especially the classroom teachers. So sometimes the collaboration wasn't always the best. It was almost like a separate team was making student-based decisions and then bringing in the classroom teachers after that. And so I'm very glad we've increased that collaborative piece. Also, we did have math and reading intervention, which was occurring kindergarten through 3rd grade, primarily tier 3. Sometimes we were skipping that tier 2 at that time. And then also we had almost like silos. So the interventionists were working very hard, but in their separate silo, and the classroom teacher was working very hard, but in their separate silo. So we knew that collaboration had to be increased between all the stakeholders in order to see that growth with the intervention and student achievement. We also gradually started to add in intervention beyond 3rd grade, which was great, and we'll talk more about that later. Let's see here. Oh, and then at that time, we did not have any tier 2 or tier 3 reading or math support at the secondary level. So you can imagine that there wasn't the best collaboration regarding that. With special education, we did have pockets of good collaboration, but again, we wanted things more systematic with our parents and between special ed and regular ed teachers. And then also there was some family engagement systems that were in place, but we've increased that as well. So Dan, would you like to talk a little bit?
Yeah. So I think it's nice to kind of look back and have some of that hindsight and see some of the things that we were doing, 5 to 7 years ago, and really help us figure out what that growth looks like. Because on a day-to-day basis, sometimes it doesn't feel like you're making progress, and sometimes it's very challenging. But when you see where you were and where you are now, you can really get a sense of, yeah, we're really doing some things well. We're on the right path, and we've got the right people involved. So on this slide here, we have a picture, kind of an interesting picture. At the beginning of the year, our superintendent, she did an all-staff thing at the high school, and one of the things she talked about was collaboration and collaborative practices. And a way for us to kind of get together and demonstrate that a little bit is she had all of us, all the teachers and educators and support staff, come up on stage. We all got an instrument, drums and tambourines and bells, and she led basically like a drum circle, and we all had to work together to be on the same beat and do those types of things. But she was really emphasizing, how do we all have to work together? How do we all have to be on the same beat to make this thing go? And so it was a really nice way to kick off this year, and so we have that picture there to kind of demonstrate it. It was really fun. So
we will not be sharing that that video.
No videos of that. And so, I'm starting to think about where we are now. We had the previous slide where we talked about where we were, and where we are now is a lot of things that we improved upon all those items. So we took a lot of the practices that we were already doing, which were pretty nice practices, but we really refined them and we made them more systemic. And so with that, I think we've had better collaborative practices. So when we're looking at some of the things that we're doing now, I think a little better than maybe we were doing before is having those weekly and monthly PLC meetings, and that involves, whether it's a grade level or if it's a certain discipline, is making sure that they're connecting multiple times a week as a group and really talking about some of the areas that they need to work on, whether it's units of study or whether it's kid time or or whatever the topics need to be. We also have coaches who come in and support our grade level teams and our disciplinary teams, reading coaches, math coaches, tech coaches, really trying to bring as much information to our classroom as possible, and the best way to do that is through just connecting, again, all those key stakeholders. So again, making an emphasis and a point on adding that to the schedule, I think, is really our priority. So you have those grade level and those content area level teams meeting very frequently. You also have our building leadership teams meeting pretty frequently, so you're kind of moving up a little bit and making sure that we're all on the same page and we're all sending the same message. From a behavioral standpoint, kind of a social emotional learning standpoint, especially at the K-6 level, we've really tried to build our system and our teams around promoting good social emotional practices. So we've utilized tribes at one of our elementary schools and kind of more of a PBIS system at another school. So we're really trying to pull everybody together from that behavioral standpoint to figure out how we can have better outcomes from our students. And then also, again, from that student services perspective, making sure that we're making time for our general education teachers, our special education teachers, our related services providers, just making time for them to be able to meet to collaborate, because again, when they're able to connect frequently, we do have better outcomes. And so again, that is a challenge at times, you know, in some districts, and a challenge that we've gone through is where do you get the time from? And I think, you know, kind of simply put, plainly put, you just have to make the time. You have to find the time. You have to make it a priority to build that collaboration, because when you do, you are going to have those better outcomes. So another thing that we do is, again, kind of talking about that schedule, but again, from a week-to-week standpoint, making time for each other, but also looking at our annual calendar and saying, okay, you know, we're going to set a time at least every 6 weeks to do a couple of things. A, we're going to sit down and we're going to do some professional development, get together and work together on becoming better educators. But also we're going to take some time on top of that every 4 to 6 weeks to sit down as teams and look at data and look at our trends and trying to figure out if what we're doing is effective. And again, kind of trying to break down that silo perspective and say, hey, we're all working with Johnny. How do we connect what we're doing within the classroom to what we're doing in intervention, and making sure that we're all swimming in the same direction? So again, making that time within our schedule, whether it's weekly or, you know, again, every 4 to 6 weeks, to really look at it and to talk amongst ourselves to make sure we're doing the best for kids. Kind of, again, talking a little bit about where we are now. We really tried to, and we've touched on this a little bit, and we'll touch on it a little bit more here in a little bit, but kind of increasing or expanding that coaching model. So again, seeing a lot of success with that from at the secondary level. How can we expand that out to the elementary level, and how can we put, you know, quote unquote experts kind of in the position to really work side by side with our teachers who are working with kids every day to improve their practices and, again, to improve their outcomes. So we'll talk a little bit more about that coaching piece, but again, making the time and finding the resources available to support our teachers was really important, and something that we thought was a priority in making sure we could do. Talking a little bit about family engagement. When we're talking collaboration, it's not just about what we're doing here in the school, but how do we connect home to school? Because we know that, you know, we're seeing our students, we're touching our students, you know, 6 to 8 hours a day, but you know those parents are incredibly important stakeholders in the outcomes of our students, and so we know that if we're going to have the best student outcomes, it's going to be tied to how we connect with families, and again, that's an area that I feel like we've really grown in a lot of ways here in the last few years. But some of the ways that we've done that is we're making sure that we're providing them with that universal data, so they know what are we collecting in terms of information about our students and their progress, but how are we going to use that information to support their children and to make sure that they're learning and growing. And again, from that growth perspective, we've really expanded on from our Tier 2 and Tier 3 perspective, making sure that we're connecting our interventionists as well with that home setting. So I think I think our first step was, yeah, let's get that universal information out to parents, and we were doing that pretty well. But then we said, you know what, we also have a gap in making sure that parents understand, you know, why their child is receiving extra support, but what that support looks like, and again, how their progress looks. So we've expanded on providing that information to our families, and including progress reports every 6 weeks. So they become you know, a really important piece of that collaboration process. You know, like most districts, we also have our conferences, but we've really, you know, we really emphasize this idea that we're available and we're open at any time to meet with families and to talk about their needs. And so, yes, we have the conferences, but we really want to make sure that we include parents in on being part of that process. So whether that's you know, just a random parent who wants to talk about their child and their data, or if it's a tier 2 or tier 3 problem solving team meeting that we need to have on a specific kid, we really want to find ways to bring parents in on that, because again, they're with their kids, you know, even more than we are at times, and we want to make sure that we're on the same page and we're connecting, we're doing the same thing to help support their children's outcomes.
And as far as like the tier 2 and tier 3 like interventionist letters, I mean, that's been a huge piece where with our RTI handbook we developed you know, a systematic way and expectations from those staff in collaborating with parents. So it's not just through the classroom teacher, but also in conjunction with the interventionist.
Yeah, just a really big emphasis, I'd say, even in the last, you know, 12 months, is making sure that we're building that. And so I'm going to have a slide here in a second kind of showing some of our progress, but in a lot of ways we've really focused on the tier 2, tier 3 level, and those collaborative practices and connecting them with in the home, with the home setting as well. And then also I just included their class web pages and newsletters. Again, any way that we can bring parents into the loop of what we're doing, and having that collaboration and just overall connectivity with the home setting for what we're doing. That's what we want. Again, that's gonna lead to better outcomes. And then lastly, within our special education department, our student services department, we're working on a inclusion initiative here. We're in our second year of really trying to find ways to get our students who have different disabilities into the classroom as much as possible. So they're accessing the instruction as much as they can too. And again, our hope is to close that achievement gap. But through that, we've been able to really, I think, connect our general education teachers with our special education teachers, with our speech and language therapists and our OTs and our PTs, and I think just through that process, we've really built really strong bridges of collaboration. I think before we were at a point where we were doing a lot more pullout, and sometimes a general ed teacher didn't know all of what was happening when their student was being pulled out into the special education room. But I think through this inclusion model, we've really, again, improved collaboration and improved this idea that these are shared students, and we're all working together to meet their needs. And so, again, through this inclusion initiative, we've really been able to increase collaboration and increase face time between all the educators working with a student. And again, that's hard to do, and it's an investment that we've made, that we've really thought this is a priority for us to try to improve the outcomes of our students.
So just to give a little bit of perspective, if there's any administrators in the crowd, as far as how do you make all of these things happen from a resource standpoint, because that's a really critical piece to improving these systems. And just to give you a couple of examples, first of all, every decision that we make in the Pewaukee School District is extremely data-driven. So when we talk about our family engagement, we've been surveying our parents for over 20 years on their satisfaction and the information that they receive, their understanding of the information we receive in a variety of different ways. We use that data to constantly be improving how we're going to go about a delivery of our communication and engagement of our families. So for example, we discovered last year that parents of students who were receiving intervention didn't have enough progress updates about their child, and so we developed a communication and a process for that communication that makes sure that every 6 weeks everybody is being held accountable that needs to be communicating with parents about the progress that their child is making. And so we're constantly using those data sources to drive our decisions and then to drive our resource allocation as well. We try to get data points on non-education related items that may help us save some money and therefore reinvest it. And we have expanded our coaching model significantly in the last 5 years. Most of that has happened through non-education related systems that we have found efficiencies in, including our energy sources. We started wellness activities so that we saved money through our health insurance, and we've been able to add staff each and every year because we have been able to find other efficiencies that don't have to come out of increasing class sizes or cutting positions or cutting programming in order to do some of these other things. So the use of data to determine your resource allocation is also a critical component to ensuring that you can create these collaborative situations.
Yeah. So it's complex. It's a challenge, and it's a district-wide thing. It's a matter of looking at everything that's happening within the district to try to improve practices, and again, then try to improve student outcomes. This is just a slide kind of detailing a little bit about, again, that idea of meeting every 6 weeks and trying to be data-driven and trying to determine, are students making progress? Is what we're doing effective? And so, again, this slide sort of outlines one piece of that collaborative process. But again, every 6 weeks, our classroom teachers and our interventionists, as well as our administrators, school psychologists, sometimes our counselors, we meet, we sit down, and we look at several different pieces of data, whether that's our universal information through our MAP assessment or F&P assessment, or if it's our progress monitoring data for our students who are in intervention, and using our STAR Ames Web data and state assessments and any other information and data that sits out there. But again, making that time kind of in the calendar and saying, we're going to sit down as a group and really look at this and see if what we're doing is working. We have pretty big teams here, especially at the elementary level. We have 8 and 9 sections of most grades here, and so when we meet, we actually pull the whole team together. So if we have a 3rd grade team meeting and we have 9 3rd grade teachers, they're all there, even if we're just talking about our students in intervention. So, and sometimes that's a challenge if you're a teacher and your student's on intervention, but again, we're really trying to build a systemic process for how we meet and working together to support each other. And so if your student is in intervention, you don't have a student in intervention, we want you to be there and support your teammates, your grade level teacher, to help improve the outcomes of all of our students. So again, we really make an emphasis on having a nice sized team, problem solving together, and again, making a point in putting that in the schedule and developing those expectations, I think is just important. Then again, using all that data then to determine whether students need to change tiers, they need less intervention, more intervention, something different. Again, we do that collaboratively. We try to figure out what's appropriate for the student and kind of put all of our options out on the table through a problem-solving process, and so that's kind of how our process works for that. And at some point, we may, as a team, kind of look at, do we need to refer a student for special education? A lot of times that will go through a building problem-solving team as well, so it'll be a much more intimate and comprehensive team that's looking at a student from a lot of different perspectives, but that usually comes at some point out of our larger teams. And then looking at Tier 3 and RTI plans, we review them as needed. So when we do meet as a problem-solving team, we're making sure that we're following up on those plans to make sure that our plans are working or not working, and making changes we need to make.
And then, with looking at when students may or may not need to change a tier or the plan needs to be changed, at the secondary level, we're still really working on that with determining if the intervention is skill-based and then using that progress monitoring data. Sometimes that data is very different than how the student is doing in the classroom. And if they're still flunking Algebra 2, but yet their standardized data is showing, they're at the 50th, 60th percentile, which is saying, no, they don't need intervention, yet they're flunking. So it really does take collaboration and teamwork and to look at that whole student, because sometimes just the hard data isn't enough to make a decision. So, and that's still something that we're still working on for sure. So.
Yeah, and with that, I think one of the challenges is you've heard us say 6 weeks quite a bit, or 12 weeks or whatever, and I think it's about communicating this message that every 6 weeks we're not necessarily having to make a change, and maybe it's 8 weeks, or maybe it's 12 weeks, or maybe it's more, but I think that has to come collaboratively. So something that we're working on is kind of breaking down this idea or understanding that it's 6 weeks now, my clock is up, now what are we going to do? Are we going to do something different? And it's not about that. And so again, working collaboratively and trying to figure out, what's best for the student, whether it's 6 weeks or 12 weeks or longer. I think through problem solving together is where we're able to come up with those solutions. And then also with that special education piece too, making sure that we're, again, connecting in the home setting with the home setting in terms of reporting out on progress at least every 6 weeks, if not more. So that's something that we're really trying to focus on here right now. Probably my favorite slide, because I'm kind of a nerd, but I really like, I like the graphs here. What we've used here in the district for a couple of years now is the school-wide implementation review, or the SIR. It's available through the RTI Center. But it's a way for us to self-assess, hey, are we making progress in an area or aren't we making progress in an area? And that is a free tool that we've accessed. And it takes a while for our teams to sit down and go through it, but again, it yields really, really nice data about where we're at in a lot of different ways. But this slide is just an example of one from our elementary school, and I didn't include all the graphs or all the bars for it, but I really had the collaboration at the universal level, the collaboration at the selective intensive level, and then our family engagement. And just as an example, you can see that we've made growth in each of these areas for over the last 3 years, and part of that is because we've looked at our data and we said, these are kind of gaps with what we're doing. Now, again, this is just one school. We have district-wide information that we really look at, and our goal, again, is to look at this and say, hey, where are our holes? How can we improve it? The funny thing about this particular graph, which I think is kind of interesting, is you see a larger growth in the selective intensive and even in the family engagement over the last year, and I can tell you that is definitely something we've really focused on, is how do we get the information to parents? How do we let them know that this is where their child's at? How can we involve them in the process? We've really also, like we've talked about, broken down some of those silos. How can we say it's not an intervention student or a classroom student, it's a shared student? So those are really two areas that I can tell you in the last 18 months we've really worked hard on, and you can see the growth in those areas. And as you can see, we want to continue to build that collaboration within the universal level, and through our coaching model, we'll definitely hopefully see improvement there.
So as we've talked about a little bit, we have had a comprehensive coaching model in our district for the last couple of years, but 5 years ago that wasn't necessarily the case. But as we started to bring in a couple of learning coaches in some part-time positions, we started to see not only the power and the buy-in from our staff around collaborative practices and other RTI measures, but we also started to see achievement by our students. And so we felt that there was a pretty close correlation between what our learning coaches were able to do for our staff and the achievement of our students, particularly in reading and math, which is where we focused our learning coaches initially, though we now have some technology coaches in the district as well. So the graph that you see on this slide is our process for our learning coaches, and it's really about that facilitation of improvement in instruction for our staff members, and therefore that trickles down to what students receive in the classroom and ultimately impact their learning. And as you can see, it's not a do this and then this next step and continue on the path, that it's continuous and it goes in all directions, that just like we know for our students that we have to continually differentiate and personalize instruction, we have to do that for our staff as well, and our learning coaches have been able to leverage that for us because they have the time to either be in the classrooms of our teachers learning what it is that they need to improve upon in their instruction, or they've been able to do some larger professional development that is more timely, and they have really a better understanding of where staff is at because they're viewed as a peer to their staff versus sometimes administrators. We have our own ideas, and that might or might not be where our staff is actually prepared to move and lead. Our learning coaches are also viewed then as a go-to person to not only potentially help out in a situation where a kid starts to struggle and they may need to assist in some ways, and so at times they act as a teacher in the classroom so that the classroom teacher can perhaps have some individual time with that struggling learner. They can serve that role, and they can also serve as really a mentor or a collaborator with the teacher to find out what could we do differently for a particular student that we aren't doing for the whole class or for small groups of students. And so they have been an excellent resource for us to use, not only for moving our entire staff towards better practices, specifically around literacy or technology or math practices, but also around individual teachers and the areas of growth that they need.
And then I personally think a great benefit to the coaching is that in all of our buildings, our literacy and math coaches, and even at the secondary level, technology and science coaches, sit in on our building problem-solving teams. And so sometimes, yes, we might be talking, collaborating regarding a student with behavioral difficulties, but I mean, those coaches are just so well-rounded in recommendations that they're just a really big benefit to the collaborative process.
And we have a mixed bag of what our coaches look like. Some are part-time classroom teachers, part-time learning coaches, and they have some release in their schedule. Some of them are learning coaches and do provide some interventions for us as well. Others are full-time learning coaches. And so we have a mixed bag and a mixed variety of our coaches. Almost all of our coaches, though we've added a few staff along the way, have come from existing FTE. So there were times where we may have lost a position due to retirement or somebody moving on to another position, and we did not replace that position necessarily, but rather we added a learning coach or part of a learning coach in order to grow this model. We also have a lot of intentional coaching with our staff as well as part of our educator effectiveness model, that any teacher who is in the first year of a 3-year cycle, so the year after their summary year, they are all assigned a coach, and that coach works with them through the EEP process. We're a educator effectiveness, not a strong model district. So they work with them through the EEP process the first year and are in their classroom working with some coaching. That way we know that all of our staff members, and this includes our coaches, they're coached by other coaches. That way we know all of our staff members receive some intentional coaching at least once every 3 years, but all of them are engaged in the professional development that we do as a whole staff, as well as can access those learning coaches for those individual sessions also. So in order to prepare for today's webinar, we wanted to get some perspective and just share with you the perspective of other folks other than the 3 of us who are really intimately involved with our RTI process and have been for the last 5 or 6 years. And so when we talked with our administrators and our interventionists, all of them had very positive things to say about how collaboration has improved in our district. And I think one of the keys to our collaborative success has been that we're very intentional when we collaborate. Sometimes you may think that in order to get great collaboration, it should be more loosely structured, that you should allow people to feel that they have the ability to share whatever is on their mind at that time in order to make sure that everybody's opinions are heard. But what we have found is that if we really structure our collaboration, we have more success and more buy-in from our staff. 5 or 6 years ago at the high school level, we would have what sort of looked like team meetings around data whenever we would have our universal screening data come in. And we were really successful at meeting for an hour or more and just continuing to dissect what was wrong with why our students weren't learning. And usually it only ended up focusing on 1 or 2 students because that's, how long it took us to diagnose all of the challenges that one particular student had. When we changed the focus of those meetings came in with a strong agenda and a strong timeline, and utilized a lot of structures that, if you read any research about how to run a meeting, actually put in place. We ended up finding that we had more teacher buy-in because they thought that their time was being well used. We were more productive. We didn't spend the time focusing out what was wrong. We focused on actions and how we could make something different occur and disrupt the challenges and the learning that was currently happening because it wasn't working at the time. And it became much more progressive, and we got a lot more accomplished in that time. It was actually a more collaborative environment because everybody felt that, yes, their voices were still heard, they still had that opportunity, but we weren't belaboring points that we didn't need to belabor. And so we saw the shift both from a collaborative standpoint as well as ultimately from a student learning standpoint as well. So I talked a little bit already about how we were able to allocate resources, and there's 100 different examples that we can go through of how we saved money here to add a resource over there. But the long and the short of it is that we had a laser-like focus on making sure that all of our decisions were first for the students and second for the adults. And that doesn't always go over extremely well with people, but we also have a culture of understanding and a culture of professionalism here where folks realize that we're going to make decisions that are first in the best interest of students. And when you look at obviously what RTI is meant to do, it is extremely student focused. And so it was easy to make our RTI efforts a strong focus of the district, and really RTI isn't separate from what we do. It encompasses everything that we do and is part of just our process for how we go about making sure that every student is college and career ready. And so I mentioned the fact that we have our coaching model that is a K-12 model that's district owned. At first it started at the high school, and then there was a pocket in the elementary school, and we tend to pilot a lot of ideas before we roll them out whole scale. But we have since taken over our interventionist and our coaching model K-12 so that we're making decisions best for all students. So if an interventionist, they may have worked primarily in the elementary school, but a couple years ago we had an emerging need at the secondary level where we didn't have interventionists. We needed interventionist support. We didn't have the expertise at the secondary level in reading strategies, and so we moved, because they were controlled from a district perspective, we were able to move one of our interventionists that was at the elementary level to the middle and high school level, and that teacher was actually extremely sad to retire 2 years later because she felt that she actually finally found her niche, and she never knew it. She never knew that middle and high school was probably where she should have spent her entire career, but you know, it doesn't always have to be a worst case scenario. In fact, almost always it's worked out really well for both the staff member and certainly for the students in mind. As I mentioned, we are always using data to connect what it is that we need to be doing with what it is that we're going to be doing, and making those decisions from there. And I gave you that example of improving our communication strategies a little earlier.
And then, you know, with that, you know, using data, I mean, you know, I think a lot of teachers, you know, they like to use their gut, you know, and so that has been a really big change for some staff, even some of our interventionists, where they've always been used to doing what they normally do, and now we're saying, oh, no, let's use this progress monitoring tool instead, and oh, you have to collaborate with the parent, and now you have to collaborate with the teacher more. So there's been growing pains. We're not going to lie about that, but I think we're continuously getting better at the collaboration piece and understanding everybody's changes in their role definition.
I was going to say too is it's not about just collecting the data, and it's also not just about collecting the data and getting it in the hands of people, but it's collecting the data, getting it in the hands of people, and having them come together and talk about it and ask questions about it, make sense of it. So it's hard when you collect a lot of information and you're trying to put it all together. And I think that gut or that teacher perspective is important, but we're really focused on how do we make database decisions to improve our student-based decisions, so to speak.
And we continue to work through the challenges of our teachers understanding that taking the time to sift through the data, taking a day away from our students with our interventionists and pausing to look at the data, analyze it, and make decisions for the next 6 weeks is a valuable use of time. We are much farther along in that than we were a couple of years ago, and really kind of over that hurdle, but we continue to reinforce that message with them because looking at data isn't natural for many of us in education, and we don't always know what to do with it. We can figure out what it tells us, but we don't always know what to do with it, and so that continues to be an area of growth for us. We're going to be entering yet another inception of our elementary schedule, which will be the third inception, fourth inception in about the last 5 or 6 years. That is one that we just have not found the right fit just yet, and some of that has to do with our efforts around intervention, and then there are those thousands of other influences upon a schedule to make sure that we're maximizing everybody's time and making sure that students get all the support that they need. So we're continuing to work out those different strategies. There's different types of scheduling strategies at the secondary level, perhaps even less flexibility, although the elementary, can be very challenging also. And so we're constantly having to rethink how we go about approaching things in order to make the most student-centered decision possible.
Yeah, and the bottom there just says, it talks a little bit about change, but I think to steal some terminology from the RTI Center is they have gone, we want to add purpose to what we're doing and build that purpose. And sometimes it's easier impulses to jump right into, let's implement this, let's try this. And usually those things either they don't work or they take a long time to work because there's no real purpose. And when we think about our collaborative processes, that's where we have to start. We have to have all those stakeholders on board. We have to have everybody understand what is it we're doing and why is it important and why will it have positive outcomes for students. And so again, kind of reflecting on what the RTI Center talks about is you first have your purpose building stage before you move into adding the infrastructure to carry out that, and then you'll have your initial implementation of whatever it is you're trying, and then you'll begin to refine your practices. But again, it all is all predicated on the success of your purpose building and pulling everybody together to be on the same page in a collaborative way.
And then where we want to go. We're an ambitious group here, so this was hard to only put a few things on here. And two, I think we always need to remember where we've come from, because we're always looking forward, which is great. We want to continue to integrate the role of the coach, continue to grow that coaching model, not only within Tier 1, but Tier 2 and Tier 3, which includes special education. We really want to continue that collaboration and increase that collaboration. We still want to continue to establish a more effective universal process for documenting the ongoing collaboration. We want to work smarter rather than harder. We have some paper systems. We have some online systems for documentation. We want to really be smart about what do we need to write down about our collaboration that's going to help the student and other teachers in the future. So we're still working on that piece for sure. Excuse me. We want to continue to have a K-12 system. We are unique in that, Pewaukee is all on one campus with our 4 buildings, pre-K through 12. And even though sometimes we are so close, across the parking lot, sometimes we still need to increase our collaboration between building to building. And so that is always a goal, to continue to increase that K-12.
Yeah, and one of the challenges there too is a lot of times we say we want the K-12 thing, and then we get to talking and we say, well, this works best for K-6. It doesn't work the same way for 7-12. So there's some really basic systemic things that we have that are K-12 that are, in a sense, non-negotiable that we have to work through. But then in some ways there's a little bit of flexibility with how it needs to look at in each setting. But again, at the heart of it, we want to make sure that we're all engaged in the same kind of process, K-12.
And then we also want to continue to have clear role expectations. I think that when you're clear on what your job is, it can always affect collaboration and increase the effectiveness of your collaboration. We also want to increase the effectiveness of our communication and tools. I mean, that's collaboration in a nutshell. And then also we want to increase the fidelity and use of our RTI handbook. We have collaborative expectations and practices within the handbook, but now we really want to continue to improve and make those real. We have a lot of great stuff going on and much done with fidelity, but we just always want to continue to increase that.
And in the handout section of this webinar, you'll find our handbook as well. We have a number of appendices that we didn't include in that just because they're forms that are specific to us, but we are happy to share those forms with you if there's anything that you see in the handbook that sounds interesting and wondering if we have a form that goes with that. We're happy to share those with you.
And then something that's definitely related to this is and I'm sure some of you have experienced this, is the collaboration between the classroom teacher and the interventionist or any other individuals that are working with that student. We really want to continue to work on that and make sure that there's not sides of who should get intervention, who shouldn't, or I'm going to cherry pick this data point versus this data point. That's definitely you know, an area of growth that we're continuing to work on. So maybe some of you can relate to that. And lastly, we want to know if you guys have any questions. We're here for another 10 minutes if you have any additional questions.
Thanks, Pewaukee team. Some really strong practices that you shared about intentionally working on some pieces that, starting with the restructuring piece, really helped to lead to some of the reculturing piece, which we heard through that, I think, that strong principal quote about how it's starting to impact the way that your system thinks together. We did have a couple of questions that came through as you were talking. One of the questions was about family engagement. So we heard some strategies for doing communication from the school to the home. And the question was about what are some ways that you're engaging families in a two-way type of a conversation?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different strategies that we use for that. We do hold some focus groups. Our superintendent holds focus groups with parents each year on a variety of different topics, as well as some of our schools hold focus groups for our parents. We also survey our parents multiple times in order to get feedback from them in that way. And then as part of our RTI process, anytime a student is going to be discussed in our RTI process, we connect with the family before that meeting to learn what concerns they may have or what strategies they have seen work well with their child, and then we connect with them after that meeting as well. At times our parents are also engaged in those meetings, but our structures for those meetings typically we're only talking about a student for a pretty brief amount of time, and it's really all about action planning. We kind of gather all the information beforehand and then just action plan around that and then connect with the families in that manner as well.
Thank you. We also had a question about the types of, you talked quite a bit about the role of your instructional coaches in changing both instructional success as well as collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about some of the training that you've provided for instructional coaches and how you support the coaches in this process?
Sure. So our training for our coaches has been a little bit different based on what their needs are. So for example, our science coach received training in Aligned by Design model, which was then the science tiered system that we moved towards at the secondary level. Our literacy coaches, they continually are being trained in literacy practices. At times that's meant sending them to national conferences or other local conferences. It also means connecting them with area leaders in literacy, and this is true of our math practices as well. So we have various consortiums that we work with or work through our CISA in order to make sure that they are a part of those learning sessions and a part of those learning teams from a regional standpoint as well. And then there are some that are specifically trained in what we know to be certain strategies that are successful. So AVMR training for our math folks, and we have sent, well, really the majority of our elementary teachers, but especially our literacy coaches to Lucy Calkins Writers Readers Workshop training because that's an emphasis of literacy strategies in our district. And so we have a professional development model for all of our staff, but particularly for our learning coaches to make sure that they're keeping up on those best practices.
Thank you. We do have one more question about, you talked quite a bit about the use of data in your system, and this question is about the data to help to determine personalized learning paths. So if you could talk a little bit about that as part of your universal, I would imagine it extends across all tiers.
Yeah, so we have a few data points that we're consistently looking at, our universal screener. So we use MAP as well as whichever state assessments at the appropriate grade level is necessary. So we take a look at that, and then we follow our RTI process to start to individualize those paths for those struggling students. But then really for all learners, we develop personalized learning goals for most of those students. That's an area that we continue to grow, and we have pockets of different personalized learning pathways that students are engaged in. But whenever we have data that indicates that a student is perhaps exceptional in a particular area and we need to differentiate instruction for them, or if they're struggling, that's when those personalized learning paths begin. But we have a lot of personalized learning that happens for all students, so it's hard necessarily to say that our data is always driving those strategies. We really believe that a personalized learning path should occur for students, and so we are standards based, and a student's performance on their standards in the various content areas are very much going to guide the instruction that that student receives and the differentiation that they receive. So now that we're standards-based K-12, and we were K-8 the last couple of years, and this year the high school joined in with reporting on that. That has really been a key feature to personalized learning for us.
And also instructionally, we've utilized a workshop model as well, especially at the elementary level, so for readers and writing. And so students are able to access, all students are able to access a mini lesson, but then able to then go back and read in their own text level, or to write about whatever topic the mini lesson is about at their level, and able by that's your one perspective and offering lots of things.
Dan, I think we lost a little bit of audio at the end there. Could you repeat just the end of what you had said?
I said the best thing that could have ever been said, and I don't think it could be repeated. So.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Well played, sir.
I talked a little more specifically about our instructional practices being sort of based on this idea of wanting to personalize, and so especially at the elementary level, using the workshop models, especially for reading and writing, and offering all students a mini lesson on a specific topic, but then having them go back and work independently or in small groups at the level they're at. So if it's reading, they get the mini lesson, but then they go back and they're reading books at their level. So not all students are reading the same level of text if that's not where all students are at. And if it's writing, they get the lesson, and then they're writing at their comfort level and their proficiency level, and guiding their grading and their standards based grading on that. So that's one way we're also able to personalize through the universal instruction level as well.
Well, we are coming up on 2 o'clock. I know there's a couple of additional questions in the question box, and I'm going to ask that those individuals who have questions refer to the emails that we have posted here. So again, I want to thank Kelly and Dan and Danielle for, I'm sure this was a fast hour filled with a really great story. So thank you, Pewaukee, for sharing your story with us. We are, yeah, it was great. We're going to be posting the story on our YouTube channel. You'll also find it. I'll send you, everyone who's in attendance today, the link to access the recording as well as the materials. Hopefully our participants saw that you can access their handouts, their handbook, as well as their presentation in this webinar, GoToWebinar panel. I'm also going to ask that our participants, I've got a 1-question survey, and it's about just what's one takeaway that you got from this webinar, and that information is a gift to our presenters, is just some feedback on learning that you had today. So thank you again, Pewaukee, and thank you everyone for attending today. We hope you have a great weekend.